Freya, darling. Chloe's voice, smooth and cold as the marble beneath my feet, cuts through the party's cheerful hum. Could you, perhaps, help in the kitchen for a bit? Your aesthetic. It doesn't quite match the Aura Living brand tonight. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. The words are for me, but the performance is for the small cluster of impossibly polished guests standing near us. I see it in the flicker of their eyes, the slight, almost imperceptible tightening of their smiles. They heard. They understood. Chloe extends a hand, not to guide me, but to offer me a plate. It's not the heavy, minimalist ceramic ware stacked elegantly on the buffet island, the ones bearing the subtle Aura logo on the underside. It's a paper plate, white, flimsy, with a slightly ridged edge, the kind you use for a child's birthday in a public park. Just so you can grab a bite before things get too hectic back there, she adds, her smile a masterpiece of feigned concern. It's a gesture of pure, unadulterated dominance, a public branding of my status in this house she now commands. This house I paid for. My fingers, stiff with the beginnings of arthritis, close around the cheap plate. It bends slightly under the pressure of my thumb. I can feel the eyes of a woman in a shimmering silver dress on me. She looks away quickly, her attention suddenly captivated by an ice sculpture of a swan. Everyone is suddenly fascinated by something else. My son, Leo, is across the room, holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the glittering Austin skyline. He's laughing, a full-throated sound of success. He caught the exchange. I know he did. I saw his head turn for a fraction of a second. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just turned back to his conversation, his posture unchanged, leaving me to stand in the wake of his wife's perfectly executed cruelty. This is the moment. Not a loud snap, but a quiet, shearing sound deep inside my chest. The last thread of a hope I didn't even know I was still holding on to. The foolish maternal belief that beneath the layers of ambition and brand building, my son was still in there. The thread is gone. And in its place, a strange and terrifying calm settles over me. I don't say a word. I simply nod, my face a blank mask I've perfected over the last 3 years. I turn and walk toward the swinging door of the kitchen. The warmth and clatter from within feel like a different world. The smells of seared scallops and truffle oil are thick in the air. The hired chefs and servers move with practiced efficiency, their faces impassive. They don't see a matriarch being dismissed. They see an old woman in a simple gray cardigan, shuffled out of sight. I find an empty stool in a corner, out of the main traffic flow. I set the paper plate down on a stainless steel counter. I don't put any food on it. I just stare at its empty white surface. It feels like a summary of my current existence. Disposable, flimsy, meant to be used and then thrown away. The laughter from the party filters through the door, a muffled, mocking soundtrack to my humiliation. I sit there, invisible, surrounded by the beautiful food I will not eat, in the heart of the home that is no longer mine. Each beat of my heart feels slow, deliberate, a drum marking the end of one life and the beginning of something else, something cold and hard and patient. The last of the catering vans pulled away hours ago. The house is silent now, but the noise of the party, the ghost of Chloe's voice, still echoes in the narrow confines of my room. My room. A generous term for what is essentially a converted storage closet next to the laundry. There are no windows. The air is perpetually thick with the faint, cloying scent of lavender-scented dryer sheets. My bed is a simple cot. My possessions are confined to a single suitcase in the corner. They gave me a tablet, a cheap, off-brand thing with a screen protector that's bubbled at the edges. I know they monitor its usage. It's their way of keeping tabs on me, a digital leash disguised as a kindness. Tonight, I pick it up. My fingers feel clumsy on the greasy screen. It's a compulsion, this need to see what I already know, to pour salt into the wound they so expertly carved. I open Instagram. The feed is a torrent of their success. #Aura Living. #Forbes. Feature. #Power Couple. #Boss Babe. 100 different angles of the same triumphant story, none of which include me. I see a photo posted by the woman in the silver dress. She's posing with Chloe, their heads tilted together. The caption reads, "So inspired by this visionary. At Chloe Vance is changing the world, one mindful product at a time. Visionary." I remember Chloe, years ago, crying in my kitchen because she couldn't figure out how to balance a checkbook. I keep scrolling. There's a boomerang of champagne glasses clinking, the bubbles catching the light. There's a candid shot of Leo, my son, leaning against the Porsche I bought him as a company car, looking every bit the self-made tech mogul. His smile is so bright, so genuine. He looks happier than I've seen him in years. He looks like a stranger. He's tagged in dozens of photos, celebrated, admired. The son of Freya Thorne, the quiet, brilliant engineer, has been completely subsumed by Leo Vance, the husband of an influencer. My thumb hovers over a new post. It's from Chloe. It was posted less than an hour ago. The photo is a professional one, likely taken by the hired event photographer. It's of her and Leo, standing in the exact spot where she dismissed me. They are holding hands, raising their glasses to the camera, their faces alight with victory. They are radiant. They are untouchable. And then I read the caption, "To building our dreams from the ground up, with no help from anyone." The words don't land like a slap. They land like a quiet internal detonation. The air leaves my lungs in a silent rush. It's not just the lie. It's the totality of it, the sheer, breathtaking audacity. No help from anyone. The phrase erases my late husband Richard, whose genius created the seed money they think of as their own. It erases the $500,000 I gave them, the money from the sale of my beloved home, a gift that was meant to be a test of their character, a test they failed so spectacularly. It erases the nights I spent babysitting their first dog so they could go on networking retreats. It erases the family recipes I gave Chloe that she now passes off as her own creations on her blog. It erases the very foundation their gilded cage is built upon. The public humiliation with the paper plate was about putting me in my place. This is about erasing my existence entirely. It's a declaration that I was never there, that I contributed nothing, that I am nothing. The cheap tablet feels impossibly heavy in my hands. The glow from the screen illuminates the starkness of my little room. The hum of the industrial-sized dryer next door kicks on, a low, mournful drone. In the picture, my son is smiling at his wife with a look of pure adoration. He saw her post. He liked it. He agrees with it. This is their truth now. The numbness I felt at the party begins to recede, replaced by an icy clarity. The grief is still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut. But something else is crystallizing around it. A resolve. They believe I am a frail, useless old woman, a ghost in their machine, a leech, a relic whose aesthetic doesn't match. They have written me out of their story. They have no idea I am the one who holds the pen. And tonight, sitting in this windowless room with the smell of their clean laundry, I finally decide to write a new chapter. Chloe's Instagram story was a ghost that haunted the walls of my tiny room. The flashing images, the triumphant music, the sight of my son, Leo, and his wife, shimmering under the lights of their success. And that caption, "Building our dream from the ground up, with no help from anyone." The words didn't just sting, they tried to erase me. They tried to turn me into the person they needed me to be, a frail, dependent old woman, a relic of a past that had no bearing on their glorious present. They looked at me and saw a problem to be managed, a piece of old furniture to be tucked away in a corner. They saw a woman you hand a paper plate to, lest she tarnish the brand. But that is not who I am. My name is Freya Thorne. I am 68 years old, and before these hands grew wrinkled, before my hair turned the color of ash, they wrote code. They built systems. I was a software engineer in an era when the very architecture of the digital world was being sketched out on napkins and whiteboards. I see the world in logic, in systems, in cause and effect. And my life, the one I built long before Leo was even a thought, was anything but simple or dependent. My husband, Richard, was the quietest man in any room, and always the most brilliant. He wasn't a showman. He despised opulence, calling it a disease of the insecure. While other men in his field were buying yachts and collecting sports cars, Richard was collecting first-edition books on economic theory and spending his evenings trying to solve the puzzle of ethical wealth. He saw the rot in the heart of modern finance, the predatory greed, the short-term thinking that built fortunes on the ruins of others. He wanted to create an antidote. We lived in a modest home, the one I raised Leo in. It was a house of substance, not style. The walls were lined with bookshelves that bowed under the weight of knowledge. The air smelled of old paper, fresh coffee, and the faint metallic scent of the soldering iron from my workshop in the garage. Our wealth was never in our bank statements. It was in our library, in our conversations that lasted long into the night, in the shared passion for building something meaningful, something that would last. And we did. Together, we built our great secret, a ghost in the machine of Wall Street. Richard was the financial architect, the visionary. He devised an investment strategy that was patient, principled, and almost impossibly successful. It targeted companies that prioritized sustainability, employee welfare, and genuine innovation. He had a gift for seeing the true value others missed. But he knew that great wealth attracted the very corruption he despised. It was a magnet for vultures. His greatest fear was that what we built would one day fall into the hands of someone who would pervert its purpose. That's where I came in. I was the guardian of the gate. I used my skills to build the fortress that would protect his vision. I designed a digital infrastructure for our fund, a labyrinth of code and security protocols that made it untouchable, untraceable. We structured it as a blind trust, an anonymous entity. There were no flashy headquarters, no marble lobbies. Its public face was a small, unassuming legal firm in Delaware. The money flowed through layers of digital abstraction, managed by algorithms I wrote and maintained. It was a masterpiece of anonymity, designed to shield it from ego and greed. Richard, in a moment of quiet poetry, named it Project Nightingale. Because, he said, its work was best done in the shadows, a beautiful song that most people would never hear, but whose effects would ripple out into the world. It was our life's work. Not Leo's aura living, built on Instagram filters and hollow slogans, but Nightingale, built on integrity, intellect, and a shared dream between a man and his wife. We poured everything into it. It wasn't just a fund. It was a philosophy, a testament to the idea that you could do well by doing good. And it grew. Beyond our wildest projections, it grew into a colossal, silent force in the financial world, all while we continued to live our quiet life, drinking coffee at our worn kitchen table, invisible to the world. That was our empire, not of things, but of principle. Then, the silence in our house became permanent. Richard passed away, and the weight of our shared secret, our nightingale, settled entirely onto my shoulders. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing pressure in my chest. For months, the house felt too large, the quiet too loud. In that silence, I had a choice to make. I was the sole, invisible owner of a fortune that could buy and sell a dozen Aura livings without noticing. I could have revealed myself, taken my rightful place, and lived a life of unimaginable luxury, but that would have been a betrayal of everything Richard and I stood for. And more than that, it would have been a betrayal of our son. I looked at Leo, a grown man with a wife and ambitions of his own, and I saw a stranger. I saw a man who had been raised in a house of substance but was drawn to the world of surfaces. I had to know. I had to know if any of Richard's values, of my values, had taken root in his heart, or if the seeds of our quiet, principled life had fallen on barren ground. So I designed a test, a final, definitive test of character. It was born of a mother's desperate hope. I wanted them to pass. I prayed they would pass. I told Leo and Chloe a carefully constructed story. I told them that with Richard gone, the memories in our family home were too much to bear, and the upkeep was too expensive. I told them I had sold it. It was a lie, of course. My trusted lawyer, David, the only other person who knew the truth of Project Nightingale, had drawn up a set of flawless, fictitious documents. The house wasn't sold. It was simply put under the legal guardianship of the trust, waiting for me. I sat them down in their pristine white living room, a room that already felt cold and impersonal. I took out a checkbook, my hand steady, my face a mask of a grieving, slightly lost widow. "This is from the sale of the house," I said, my voice soft. "And a little from your father's life insurance. It's not much in this day and age, but I want you to have it." I wrote the check for $500,000. The amount was precise. It was a fraction of my true worth, a rounding error in the Nightingale accounts. But to them, it was a fortune. It was enough to be a life-changing sum, to give their Aura Living brand the launch they dreamed of. But it was also small enough that it would require careful stewardship to grow. It wasn't never worry about money again, wealth. It was prove you know what to do with it, wealth. I handed the check to Leo. "A little something to get you started," I said, echoing the words every parent hopes to say. I watched their faces. I saw the flash of shock, then the barely concealed elation. Chloe's eyes widened, and a smile she couldn't contain spread across her face. Leo, my son, hugged me, a brief, tight squeeze. "Mom, you don't have to do this," he said, but his hands were already closing around the check. "Of course I do," I replied. "What else would I do with it? My life is simpler now. All I ask is if I can stay with you for a little while, just until I get back on my feet and find a small apartment." "Of course, Mom. Stay as long as you want." "This is your home now," Leo said. Chloe nodded enthusiastically, her eyes still on the number written on the check. And so, the test began. I moved into their guest room, a single suitcase in hand, playing the part of the dependent widow who had given her children her last nest egg. The test was simple. Would they care for me out of love or out of obligation? Now that they believed I had nothing left to give, would they show me kindness? Would they cherish the mother who had, in their eyes, sacrificed her final security for their dream? They failed. They failed spectacularly. The first few weeks were fine. They were filled with performative gratitude, but the $500,000 acted like a chemical agent, revealing their true natures. It wasn't invested in building a solid foundation for the business. It was spent. It was spent on the launch party, the one that would end with me in the kitchen holding a paper plate. It was spent on designer clothes to project an image of success, on a luxury car lease, on expensive dinners with influencers. It was fuel for the bonfire of their vanity. They weren't building a company, they were building a facade, and my role in their house shifted just as quickly. The "stay as long as you want" became an unspoken, permanent burden. The questions about my day stopped. I was no longer a person to them, but a presence. A quiet, inconvenient reminder of a life before their newfound glamour. The test wasn't a single event, but a slow, agonizing erosion. It was in the leftovers they'd saved for me while they ordered takeout from the city's best restaurants. It was in the way Chloe would sigh dramatically when I asked her to repeat something. It was in the way Leo would avoid my gaze, his guilt and annoyance a palpable wall between us. They believed I had given them everything, and in return, they gave me nothing. Not even the basic dignity they would afford a stranger. I wasn't just a dependent. In their eyes, I was a failure, an old woman who had mismanaged her life and now had to live off their magnificent generosity. That Instagram caption, "Building our dream from the ground up with no help from anyone," wasn't just a lie they told the world. It was the lie they told themselves. And to make that lie true, they had to erase me. They had to reduce Freya Thorne, the engineer, the partner, the creator of Nightingale, to nothing more than a ghost in their house, a ghost who was already beginning to plot her return. The test was over. The results were in, and they were utterly, devastatingly clear. The argument, if you could call it that, was brief and cloaked in the language of concern. Chloe had her hands on her hips, her Lululemon-clad frame a picture of vibrant, aggressive health. She said the stairs were becoming a hazard for me. She worried I might fall in the night. The guest room, she explained with a smile that never reached her eyes, was perfectly situated to become her new Peloton and yoga studio. The natural light was, she said, essential for the brand's creative energy. So I was moved. Not to another room, but to a space. A windowless storage area in the basement, nestled between the humming deep freeze and the sloshing washing machine. The air was a thick cocktail of damp concrete and cloying fabric softener. My world, once expansive and filled with the light of the Texas sun, shrank to the 10 by 10-foot square of beige drywall, illuminated by a single bare bulb. My beautiful oak bed frame and memory foam mattress were sold on Facebook Marketplace. Too cumbersome for the new space, Chloe had declared. They were replaced by a narrow metal cot with a mattress so thin I could feel the springs pressing into my ribs like a cold skeleton. The move itself was a quiet, brutalist ballet of efficiency. Leo, my son, carried my boxes down the steep basement stairs. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders were hunched, a familiar posture he adopted whenever Chloe's will was being enacted. He was a ghost in his own home, and I was being relegated to the crypt. He set down the last box, the one with my late husband Richard's photograph on top. "It's just for a little while, Mom," he mumbled to the floor. "Until we figure things out. It's quieter down here. Quieter." Yes, it was the silence of a tomb. My life became a rhythm of machines. The churn and spin of the washer, the high-pitched whine of the dryer, the constant low thrum of the dehumidifier Chloe had insisted on, not for my comfort, but to protect her stored seasonal wardrobes from mildew. I had a small, chipped ceramic mug for water, but my meals were a new level of humiliation. Chloe would call down the stairs, her voice artificially bright. "Freya, food's ready!" But I was not to come up. A few minutes later, she or Leo would appear with a plate. Not one of their heavy, expensive stoneware plates, but a flimsy, coated paper plate that buckled under the weight of the food. The food was always leftovers. The dry end of a roast chicken, a congealed scoop of macaroni and cheese, the wilted remains of a salad. I ate what they no longer wanted. The first time she brought it down, she also carried a small, sealed plastic baggie. Inside was a set of white plastic cutlery. "Here you go," she chirped. "I got these especially for you. They're so much lighter for you to handle, and we don't have to worry about you chipping the good dinnerware. It's Villeroy Bosch, you know, irreplaceable." I stared at the flimsy fork, the serrated knife that couldn't cut through a cooked carrot. I, who had hosted countless dinner parties with gleaming silver and fine china. I, who had taught Leo how to properly set a table before he could even read. I looked at the plastic fork, then at my hands. They were old, yes, wrinkled and spotted, but they were steady. I had built a financial empire with these hands. And now, they were deemed too clumsy, too dangerous, for a porcelain plate. I ate in silence, the scraping of the plastic on paper the only sound besides the machines. Sometimes, I could hear them upstairs, laughing. The sound of their real dinner, the clink of glasses, the murmur of their conversation about their brand, their future, their fabulous lives. I was the foundation upon which their house was built, and I was now buried in its cellar. Each day was a small, new cut. My access to the main television was revoked. Chloe explained that their smart TV was too complex, and she was worried I'd mess up the settings. She gave me an old, small tablet, the screen spider-webbed with cracks. "You can watch your shows on here," she'd said, as if granting a great favor. But she had set up the parental controls. I could only access a few pre-approved, ad-riddled streaming services. No news, no financial channels, no access to the world I once commanded. I was being curated, controlled, and slowly erased. One afternoon, I was huddled in my threadbare armchair, the one piece of my old life they'd allowed me to keep, when I heard Chloe's voice floating down the basement stairs. The door was ajar, a sliver of light and sound cutting through my gloom. She was on the phone, her voice a sharp, polished weapon. It was the voice she used with her mother, a co-conspirator in her worldview. "I know, Mother. I know. I'm trying to be patient, but honestly, I don't know how much more I can take." A pause. I held my breath, the damp air feeling heavy in my lungs. It's the constant presence. The old Leech is just here, all day. I walk into the kitchen and she's there. I go to the living room and she's there, just sitting, sucking the life out of my house, my energy. It's like living with a ghost, but a ghost that needs to be fed. A leech. The word hit me with a physical force. It wasn't just an insult, it was a diagnosis. Her diagnosis of my worth. I was a parasite, a bloodsucker, feeding on her vibrant life, the life that I had funded, the house that I had paid for, the food that was a fraction of the grocery bill I covered through the trust. The irony was so bitter, it tasted like bile. Then I heard my son's voice. A low murmur. I couldn't make out the words, but his tone was placating. He was in the room with her. He was listening to his wife describe his own mother as a leech. Chloe's voice cut through the air again, sharp with annoyance. "Oh, stop it, Leo. Don't defend her. You know it's true. We can't have people over for spontaneous things. We can't be ourselves. We're running a multi-million-dollar brand based on aspirational living, and I have a relic in a basement. It's not a good look." I waited. I prayed. I sent a silent, desperate plea up the stairs. "Say something, Leo. Defend me. Tell her I'm your mother. Tell her I gave you everything. Please." The silence that followed was more damning than any word could ever be. It was a vacuum, a void where his love and loyalty should have been. I could picture him perfectly, standing there, running a hand through his hair, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet her eyes, unable to defend his own mother. He said nothing. Not one word. His silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an agreement, an endorsement, a betrayal so profound it felt like a blade twisting in my gut. The pain was sharp, physical. I wrapped my arms around myself, a sudden deep chill seeping into my bones that had nothing to do with the basement's dampness. He was my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the young man whose college tuition I had paid, the entrepreneur whose dream I had made real. But he wasn't mine anymore. He belonged to her, to the brand, to the shimmering, hollow life they had built on my quiet sacrifices. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous gray. The incident was never mentioned. I was an expert in silence now, and so was Leo. We moved around each other with the careful choreography of strangers who share a painful secret. His guilt was a palpable thing. It made him clumsy and loud when he brought my paper plate down, his apologies for startling me too quick, too profuse. Chloe, on the other hand, was emboldened. Her victory in that unspoken battle had cemented her power. She no longer bothered with the pretense of concern. Her instructions were clipped, her sighs of exasperation audible whenever I took too long to answer her. The slow turning of the seasons was marked only by the clothes Chloe brought down to store. Summer linens were replaced by heavy wool coats and leather boots, their expensive scent a stark contrast to the mildew. Time had become a flat circle, and then a day arrived that had once been a landmark in my year, my birthday, my 69th. I woke up on the lumpy cot with a familiar, foolish flicker of hope. It's a feeling that's hard to kill, the hope a mother has in her child. Perhaps today there would be a small gesture, a card, a happy birthday, Mom, maybe even a slice of cake on a real plate. I waited all day. I listened to their footsteps overhead. I heard them take business calls, laugh at something on TV. I heard Leo leave in the afternoon and come back an hour later. The smell of coffee, but nothing else. By 7 p.m., the hope had curdled into a familiar, dull ache in my chest. I ate my dinner of leftover spaghetti, the noodles cold and stuck together on my paper plate. I washed my plastic fork in the laundry sink and set it on a paper towel to dry. I sat in my armchair, the cracked tablet on my lap, scrolling through nothing in particular. The house above me was silent. They had gone out. At 8:15 p.m., the screen lit up with a notification. It was from Instagram, a new post from Leo. My heart gave a stupid, painful leap. Maybe a photo of me from years ago? A memory? A tribute? I tapped the notification. The image that filled the screen stole the air from my lungs. It was Leo and Chloe, seated at a restaurant I recognized from glossy magazines. A Michelin-starred place with a 6-month waiting list. They were glowing, incandescently happy. Chloe held a champagne flute, her head tilted back in a laugh, diamonds sparkling at her ears. Leo was beaming, his arm wrapped possessively around her, his other hand holding his own glass up for a toast. They were beautiful. They were successful. They were a world away from the damp basement where their mother, their benefactor, sat in the dark. But it was the caption that broke me. The words, typed out in a clean, sans-serif font, were a masterpiece of cruelty. Celebrating a huge win for Aura, living with my one and only. Hard work pays off when you've got the best partner in the world. Onwards and upwards. A huge win. A win that was only possible because of the capital I provided. A win they were celebrating on the day of my birth. and the final, brutal phrase, "my one and only." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the photo. The light from the tablet illuminated the tears running down my cheeks. I hadn't just been forgotten. A forgotten birthday is a simple act of negligence, of being too busy. This was different. This was a deliberate act of replacement, a public declaration that his world, his family, his one and only, consisted of her and her alone. I had been written out of the story. I was not a character, not even a footnote. I was erased. I set the tablet down, the screen going dark. The silence in the basement was absolute now. The washing machine was still. The dryer was quiet. It was just me and the low hum of the deep freeze, a sound that felt like it was coming from inside my own chest. I was not a leech. A leech is, at least, acknowledged. I was nothing. A ghost in the foundation, a forgotten memory, a non-entity whose birthday was the perfect occasion to celebrate a life from which she had been completely and utterly excised. The silence in the basement had its own texture. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house at midnight. It was a dense, humming silence, composed of the low thrum of the water heater and the distant, rhythmic groan of the house settling. It was the sound of being forgotten. Most days, I let it envelop me, a shroud to match the gloom of my windowless room. But today, the silence was different. It felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. The source of that charge was coming from upstairs, a faint but distinct murmur from the television in the living room. Leo and Chloe rarely watched the local news, preferring curated streaming services that reflected their brand's aesthetic. My curiosity, a muscle-long atrophied, gave a faint twitch. I crept up the basement stairs, my joints protesting with a series of soft clicks. I stopped 3 steps from the top, where I could hear the audio clearly without being seen. A perky anchorwoman's voice filled the space. And Austin's own golden couple, Leo and Chloe Thorne, are here to talk about the explosive growth of Aura Living. Welcome to you both. My breath caught in my throat. I could picture it perfectly. Chloe, radiant in a cream-colored silk blouse, her hair a perfect cascade of sun-kissed waves. Leo beside her, his smile practiced, his arm draped possessively around her, the architects of my isolation, now framed as local heroes. "Thank you for having us, Maria." Chloe's voice was smooth as honey, every word polished for maximum appeal. "It's been a whirlwind, but we are just so grateful for the journey." "A journey that's taking you global, I hear?" the anchor prompted. "That's right," Leo chimed in, his voice deeper, more serious. The voice of a CEO, the voice of a stranger. "We're in the final stages of a massive global expansion. Aura Living isn't just about a curated home. It's about a curated life. We want to bring that vision to the world." I leaned my head against the cool drywall of the stairwell, my eyes closed. It was a lie. Their vision wasn't curated. It was stolen. It was built on my money, my husband's legacy, and my broken heart. Then came the blow. It was delivered not with a fist, but with Chloe's perfectly modulated, compassionate tone. "And with this expansion," Maria the anchor said, "come big changes at home too, I understand. I saw the listing for this magnificent house just went live." "It did," Chloe confirmed with a soft, almost wistful sigh. "We've simply outgrown it. We need a space that reflects the brand's new international status. But it's bittersweet, of course." "Of course," Maria cooed. "And what about your mother, Leo? Freya, isn't it? Will she be making the move with you?" A beat of silence. I held my breath, my knuckles white where I gripped the railing. "My mother's health has been a concern for us," Leo began, his voice laced with a fraudulent sincerity that made my stomach turn. "The stairs, the upkeep, it's a lot for her." Chloe seamlessly took over, her voice dripping with manufactured empathy. "We've been looking into some truly wonderful options. We want to ensure she has the best care, the most comfort. We'll find a lovely, secure retirement community for her. A place where she can be with people her own age and have professional support around the clock. It's the responsible thing to do, the loving thing to do. A lovely, secure retirement community. The words were a death sentence wrapped in a ribbon. They weren't just getting a bigger house, they were disposing of me, tidying me away like an old piece of furniture that no longer fit their aesthetic. And they were doing it on television, painting themselves as devoted children burdened by a frail, aging parent. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing the air from my lungs. The paper plate had been a private shame. This was a public execution of my identity, my role, my very existence in their lives. That night, the humming silence of the basement felt different again. It was no longer the sound of being forgotten. It was the sound of a sleeping giant beginning to stir. I waited until the house was completely still, until the rhythmic breathing I could hear through the floorboards told me they were asleep in their king-sized bed, dreaming of their global empire. I knelt on the cold concrete floor and reached under the metal-framed cot they'd given me. My fingers found the worn leather of an old suitcase, a relic from my life with Richard. It held nothing of value to them. A few faded photographs, a handful of my husband's favorite paperbacks, a silk scarf he'd bought me in Paris. I ran my hand along the inside lining until I felt the familiar, hard rectangle I had stitched into the fabric years ago, a contingency I prayed I would never need. With a small pair of scissors from a forgotten sewing kit, I carefully snipped the threads. The burner phone felt cold and alien in my hand. It was a simple, featureless black brick, a ghost from a past they never knew existed. I had charged it only once a month for the past 3 years, a ritual of grim necessity. The battery icon glowed a healthy green. I took the phone and a small, folded piece of paper from the suitcase and walked silently to the only place in the basement that offered a modicum of privacy, the small, musty closet that housed the circuit breaker. I closed the door, plunging myself into absolute darkness. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old wiring. My fingers, though trembling slightly, dialed the number from memory. It was a number I knew as well as my own name. It rang twice, a crisp, electronic tone that cut through the silence. A calm, familiar voice answered. Chen. No greeting, just his name. That was David, efficient, precise. The man my Richard had trusted with everything. My own voice, when I spoke, was a stranger's. It was not the wavering, hesitant voice of the woman who asked permission to use the good jam. It was low, steady, and devoid of emotion. It was the voice of Freya Thorne, the woman I used to be. David, I said, it's Freya. There was a pause on the other end, not of surprise, but of profound, somber understanding. He knew this call would come one day. Richard had known. They had both prepared for it. Freya, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. I'm here. What do you need? I took a deep, steadying breath, the stale air of the closet filling my lungs. This was it, the precipice, the point of no return. I was not just reclaiming a house or a fortune. I was choosing to amputate a part of my own heart to save myself. Activate Protocol Nightingale. The silence that followed was heavier than any I had ever known. I could hear the weight of those 3 words settling between us, a declaration of war. Then David's voice came back, all business once more, the warmth replaced by a steely resolve that mirrored my own. Understood, Freya. Protocol Nightingale is active as of this moment. Stand by for instructions. It's good to have you back. He hung up. I stood in the pitch-black closet for a long time, the phone clutched in my hand. I wasn't just Freya, the forgotten mother in the basement anymore. I was Nightingale, and I was awake. The next 48 hours were a study in agonizing restraint. I moved through the house as I always did, a ghost in the periphery of their vibrant lives. I ate their leftovers, washed my plastic fork and knife, and retreated to my basement cell. But inside, a storm was gathering. My mind, once foggy with grief and resignation, was now sharp, clear, and running 1,000 calculations a second. The call came on the 3rd day. The burner phone vibrated silently in my pocket as I was folding their laundry, a mountain of expensive athleisure fabrics that all felt the same, synthetic and cold. I waited until Chloe left for a Pilates class, and Leo was sequestered in his home office on a conference call, his booming synergy and optimization buzzwords echoing faintly down the hall. I locked myself in the small basement bathroom, the only door with a lock, and answered. Freya. David's voice was grim. There was none of the triumphant energy I might have expected. We have a problem. A complication. What is it? I asked. My own voice hushed, my ear pressed to the door. They're getting aggressive, he said. Far more than we anticipated. They're not content to just let the anonymous investment fund their lives. They want to know who's behind it. They've hired a private investigative firm, a very expensive, very discreet one that specializes in unmasking the beneficial owners of trusts and shell corporations. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the cold tile floor. They weren't just ungrateful. They were actively hunting me. They saw their benefactor not as a source of incredible fortune, but as a loose end to be tied up, a power to be usurped. They think if they can identify the person, David continued, his voice tight with anger, they can renegotiate the terms, or more likely, find leverage to seize full control. They want to cut the strings and own the puppet. Let them try, I said, a flicker of my old defiance surfacing. The trust is ironclad. Richard made sure of that. He did, David agreed. But that's not the worst of it, Freya. That's not the main reason I'm calling. He paused, and I could hear him shuffling papers. I've been doing a deep dive into every piece of correspondence, every document, no matter how minor, that has passed between the fund and Aura Living over the past 3 years. Standard procedure for activating the protocol. I found something. What did you find? 6 months ago, there was a maintenance issue with the house's foundation. The fund, as the property owner, had to authorize the repair. It was a standard expenditure, about $15,000. We have a document, a simple work authorization form, sent to you for your records. It has your signature on it. I frowned, trying to remember. I don't recall signing anything like that. I know you don't, David said, his voice dropping lower. Because you didn't sign it, Freya. It's your name. It's a passable imitation of your handwriting, but it's a forgery, a very clear one, if you know what to look for. The loop on your F is too high. Richard always said you made your F like a flag flying at half-mast. This one is flying high. The laundry in the basket outside the door suddenly seemed 1,000 miles away. The world narrowed to the small, damp bathroom and David's voice in my ear. A forgery. The word was so clinical, so legal. It didn't begin to capture the violation. They hadn't just lied to me, starved me of affection, and confined me to a basement. They had stolen my name. They had practiced my signature, tracing the unique shape of my identity until they could replicate it for their own purposes. It was a test run, I whispered, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. Exactly, David confirmed. It was a low-stakes document. Nothing that would trigger a major audit. They were testing the system. Testing to see if they could get your signature past the fund's administrators without raising red flags. They were successful, which means they are both capable and willing to commit outright fraud, Freya. This isn't just about greed anymore. It's criminal. I leaned my forehead against the cold metal door. The image of Chloe's serene face on the news, talking about a lovely, secure place for me, flashed in my mind. It wasn't about my safety. It was about getting me out of the way, getting my voice, my presence, my very signature out of the equation so they could fake it with impunity. They weren't just planning to put me in a home. They were planning to erase me and replace me with a signature on a dotted line. The chill I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. This was the final piece of evidence, the final nail in the coffin of the mother I had tried to be. My son and his wife didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a legal hurdle. And they had just shown me they were willing to jump it by any means necessary. Thank you, David, I said, my voice eerily steady. Continue the preparations. Leave nothing to chance. Freya? He started, a note of concern in his voice. I'm fine, I lied. I'm perfectly fine. I ended the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. I looked at my reflection in the small, cracked mirror above the sink. The woman staring back was pale, with tired eyes and graying hair. She looked weak. She looked like a victim. But her eyes held a new light, a cold, hard, calculating light. The forgery wasn't an obstacle. It was a gift. It was the justification that silenced the last, lingering whispers of a mother's love. But the silence didn't last. The cold, hard certainty I felt in that bathroom began to fracture in the lonely hours of the night. Resolve is a simple thing in the face of a clear enemy, but my enemy wore the face of my only child. The doubt began as a small crack and widened into a chasm. It paralyzed me. I'd lie on my cot, the burner phone feeling like a lead weight in my pocket, and my mind would betray me. It would wander back through time, ignoring my commands to stay focused, to stay angry. One night, unable to sleep, I pulled my old laptop from the same suitcase that hid the phone. It was ancient by today's standards, but it held my most precious cargo, a folder of digital photos and videos from before Chloe, before Aura living, before the woman in the mirror. I huddled under the single thin blanket, the laptop's glow the only light in the oppressive dark. And there he was, Leo, my Leo, a 5-year-old with a gap-toothed grin and bright, innocent eyes, holding up a dandelion and telling the camera, "This is for you, Mommy. It's a magic flower." There he was at 10, face smeared with chocolate, proudly showing off the lopsided birdhouse he'd built with his father. I could almost smell the sawdust and hear Richard's deep, rumbling laugh in the background. I clicked on a video file. It was his 17th birthday. He was standing in our old kitchen, the one with the warm yellow walls, looking awkward and gangly in a new suit we'd bought him. I was holding the camera. "Make a wish, sweetie." My voice, so much younger, so full of warmth, said from behind the lens. He closed his eyes for a long moment, then blew out the candles. In the video, he looked directly at me, at the camera, and his smile was genuine, untainted by ambition. "I wished that I could make you and Dad proud," he said. "That I could build something amazing, something that matters." A sob caught in my throat, a dry, painful thing. I slammed the laptop shut, the darkness rushing back in. Can I do this? Can I be the one who destroys him? He built something, just like he wished. It's a monstrous thing, built on a foundation of lies and cruelty, but it's his. To tear it down felt like a violation of that 17-year-old boy's wish. It felt like taking that lopsided birdhouse and smashing it to pieces in front of him. The emotional toll was immense. This wasn't a business transaction, it was an amputation. It was the deliberate, systematic process of cutting my own son out of my life, cauterizing the wound, and pretending the limb was never there. The anger that had fueled me after learning of the forgery now felt brittle, a thin crust over a deep well of grief. I was mourning a son who was still alive. I needed to hear David's voice. I needed the anchor of his pragmatism. I slipped out of my room and into the circuit breaker closet, the only place I felt safe, and dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Freya, is everything all right?" He could hear it in my silence. "I watched a video of him," I whispered, my voice thick. "He was just a boy, David." "He was a good boy." "He was," David said softly, and for a moment, he was not a lawyer, but a friend who had known that boy too. I remember him. "How can I destroy everything he's built? Even if it's wrong, it's all he has. He poured his life into this." "He poured your life into this, Freya." David's voice turned firm again, pulling me back from the edge. "He poured Richard's legacy into it, and he has tainted it. Remember what Richard used to say? A structure with a rotten foundation isn't a building, it's a trap waiting to collapse. Leo and Chloe built a trap." I was silent, picturing Richard's face, his kind eyes that could turn so serious when he talked about his principles. "He anticipated this, Freya," David continued, his voice insistent. "Not this exact cruelty, perhaps, but human nature, greed. The reclamation clause wasn't designed as a weapon to punish Leo. Richard designed it as a shield to protect you, to protect the integrity of what he built. He wrote it to ensure that the project's resources would always be used for creation, not for corruption. Their actions, The lies, the neglect, the fraud, they are the corruption. Activating the protocol isn't an act of destruction, it's a restoration. You're not tearing his building down. You are fumigating the termites that are eating it from the inside out. A restoration. The word resonated deep within me. I wasn't an avenging angel. I was a restorer, a protector. I was honoring my husband's foresight. Richard built a lifeboat, Freya, David said, his voice gentle now. He didn't build a fortress to keep the world out. He built a lifeboat to save what was most important if the flood came. You are what's most important. The clause is there to bring you safely to shore. I let his words wash over me, a balm on the raw wound of my mother's heart. The grief was still there, a dull, permanent ache. But the paralysis was gone. I would not be destroying my son. I would be saving my husband's legacy from him. I would be saving myself. I would get in the lifeboat. My decision settled something inside me. The storm of emotion receded, leaving behind a strange and unfamiliar calm. The frantic, hidden grief was replaced by a quiet, steely resignation. I no longer flinched at Chloe's passive-aggressive remarks. I no longer looked at Leo with pleading eyes. I simply existed, a quiet, unobtrusive piece of the background scenery. I thought I was being invisible, but I was wrong. I was being watched. Chloe was the first to notice the shift. She was a predator, attuned to the subtle changes in her prey. My fear had been a source of power for her, my sadness a confirmation of her superiority. My newfound tranquility was something she couldn't categorize, and it unnerved her. I'd catch her staring at me from across the vast, open-plan living space. Her eyes, usually full of disdain or irritation, were now narrowed with suspicion. She was trying to solve a puzzle. The frail, weeping woman she had so easily controlled was gone, and in her place was a quiet observer. It made her skin crawl. "Are you feeling all right, Freya?" she asked one afternoon, her voice laced with a sweetness that was more menacing than her usual scorn. I was sitting on the bottom step of the basement stairs, simply watching the dust motes dance in a sliver of light from a high window. "I'm fine, dear," I replied, my voice even and calm. "You're just so quiet lately," she pressed, circling me like a shark. "It's unsettling." "There's nothing to say," I said simply, and looked back at the dust motes. That was the wrong answer. My resignation had been replaced by a placidity she found threatening. An animal that is no longer scared is an animal that might be planning something. Her paranoia, always simmering just below the surface, boiled over. 2 days later, the technicians arrived. They were from a company called Aura Secure, a new branch of their ever-expanding empire. They were there, Chloe announced with a bright, false smile, to install an upgraded smart home security system. "For your safety, Freya," she said, placing a cold hand on my shoulder. "With the house on the market, there will be strangers coming through for viewings. We want to make sure you're always safe." Her eyes, however, told a different story. They were as cold and black as the lenses of the cameras they were installing. They put them everywhere, small, discreet black domes in the corners of every room, the kitchen, the living room, the hallways. Then, one of the technicians came down the basement stairs, drill in hand. I stood from my cot and watched as he mounted a camera on the ceiling of the main basement area. But they didn't stop there. He then went to the hallway at the top of the stairs, right outside my door. He drilled into the pristine white wall and installed another one, its lens aimed directly at the door to my room. It was a clear and unequivocal message. I was no longer just a resident of the basement. I was an inmate. My cell was now under 24-hour surveillance. Every time I left my room, every time I returned, my movements would be logged, recorded, and scrutinized. Chloe came down to inspect the work after the technician left. She glanced at the camera, then at me, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "There," she said. "Now we'll know you're safe and sound. We can even check in on you from our phones when we're traveling. Isn't technology wonderful?" I looked from her smug face to the unblinking eye of the camera. The lifeboat David had spoken of suddenly seemed a million miles away, on the other side of an ocean I had no way to cross. My one weapon, the burner phone, was now a liability. How could I make a call? How could I receive instructions? My already difficult plan had become infinitely more complex. I was a prisoner, and the warden had just installed a new watchtower. I met the camera's gaze, this tiny black eye that represented Chloe's fear and control. And in the silence of my basement prison, I understood that my next performance would have to be the greatest of my life. I would have to become the person Chloe wanted to see. A frail, harmless old woman. My war would have to be fought from behind a mask. The suspicion in Chloe's eyes after my call with David was a tangible thing, a pollutant in the air. She watched me differently, her gaze lingering, searching for a crack in my weary, grandmotherly facade. The new cameras were the physical manifestation of that suspicion, little black domes of judgment, installed with an almost manic fervor. One appeared in the main hallway, another covering the kitchen, and the most insulting of all, a sleek white one mounted on the wall just outside my basement room. It wasn't for security, it was for surveillance. It was a warden's eye for the prisoner in cell block laundry. Chloe thought she was building a cage. She had no idea I was the one who had forged the bars. And so, I began my performance. It was perhaps the most important role of my life, far more complex than playing the benevolent matriarch who had gifted her life's savings away. Now, I had to become the woman they expected me to be, the woman they secretly wanted me to be. A fading, feeble, and slightly senile old woman. A nuisance, yes, but a harmless one. The transformation began subtly. It started at the dinner table a few nights after the cameras went live. Chloe had prepared a quinoa salad with roasted vegetables, a dish that screamed, or a living. It was beautiful, bland, and served with an air of self-congratulation. Leo was scrolling through his phone, a permanent extension of his hand, while Chloe documented the meal for her followers. And here we have our nutrient-dense, plant-forward power bowl, she narrated to her phone, panning over the dish. Perfect for refueling after a killer workout. #healthy living. #boss life. I watched the little red light on her phone, the unblinking eye that broadcast their curated lies to the world. Then, I turned my attention to the real unblinking eye on the wall. I knew it was watching. I took a sip of water. My hand, which had been steady enough to solder microprocessor chips under a magnifying glass, began to tremble. It was a small, almost imperceptible tremor at first, the kind one might associate with age or a slight chill. I let it grow, my knuckles whitening around the glass. "Mom, are you cold?" Leo asked, his eyes flicking up from his screen for a brief moment, a flicker of concern that was more conditioned reflex than genuine emotion. "No, dear," I said, my voice a little thin, a little reedy. "Just a little tired today." As I brought the glass back to the table, my hand gave a more pronounced jerk. Water sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the pristine reclaimed oak of their dining table. It wasn't a huge spill, just a small puddle, but in Chloe's immaculate world, it was a tsunami. Her smile for the camera froze. She lowered the phone, her jaw tight. "Oh, for Mom, honestly?" "Oh my," I gasped, looking down at the water as if I were genuinely surprised. I fumbled with my napkin, dabbing uselessly at the puddle. "I am so sorry, Chloe. My hands, they just don't listen to me sometimes." Chloe let out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind designed to communicate maximum exasperation. "It's fine. Just be more careful." She stood up, marched to the kitchen, and returned with a wad of paper towels, wiping the spot with aggressive circular motions as if she were scrubbing away a personal insult. Leo didn't look up again. He just winced, retreating further into the blue light of his phone. He didn't defend me. He didn't offer a kind word. He just wanted the awkwardness to end. And in that moment, watching Chloe scrub the table and Leo disappear into his digital world, I felt a cold, clear satisfaction. The seed of my performance had been planted. The camera on the wall had recorded it all. A clumsy old woman, a long-suffering daughter-in-law, and an indifferent son. Perfect. The next day, I escalated the act. I lost my reading glasses. I searched my room, my pockets, the bathroom, my voice rising in a display of gentle, flustered panic. "Has anyone seen my spectacles? I can't find them anywhere. I'm sure I just had them. Chloe found them, of course. They were on top of my head. She plucked them off with 2 fingers, dangling them in front of my face like a prize. Right here, Freya. They were on your head the whole time. Her tone was a cocktail of pity and condescension. The suspicion in her eyes was gone, replaced by the familiar look of contemptuous superiority. She was no longer watching a conspirator. She was managing an incompetent. I played my part to perfection. "Oh, goodness me," I said, a blush of what she would interpret as shame creeping up my neck. "How silly of me." "Thank you, dear. My mind is just like a sieve these days." She patted my arm, a gesture devoid of all warmth. "It's okay, Freya. We all have those days." The unspoken addendum hung in the air. "But you have them every day." The cornerstone of my performance became the repeated question. It was a classic and devastatingly effective. Leo and Chloe were in the living room one evening, discussing a potential collaboration with a high-profile influencer. The camera in the corner was perfectly positioned to capture the scene. I shuffled in, clutching my thin cardigan around me. "That's a lovely new lamp," I said, pointing to a ghastly floor lamp that looked like a metallic octopus. "We've had it for 6 months, Mom," Leo said, not looking at me. "Oh," I said, nodding slowly. "It's very modern." I hovered for a moment, then shuffled back toward my room. 10 minutes later, I returned. "I was just thinking," I began, my voice filled with the air of someone who has just had a profound thought. "That lamp is new, isn't it? It really brightens up the room." Chloe's head snapped toward me. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "Freya, you just asked about the lamp." "Did I?" I looked genuinely confused, my brow furrowed. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot. Don't mind me." I retreated again. I could feel Chloe's gaze on my back, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy with a different kind of judgment. Not, what is she plotting, but what are we going to do with her? I gave it a final 20 minutes before delivering the coup de grace. I walked back into the living room, a pleasant, vacant smile on my face. I stopped, looked directly at the lamp, and then turned to Leo. "You know, Leo," I said brightly, "I don't think I've ever noticed that lamp before. Is it new?" Leo buried his face in his hands. Chloe let out a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a hiss. "Freya, that's the third time in less than an hour. We have had this lamp for months. Are you feeling all right?" I let my face fall, my eyes welling up with convincing tears. I thought, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me." I turned and fled, my shoulders slumped in a perfect imitation of defeat and humiliation. I didn't need to see the look that passed between them. I could feel it through the drywall. The conversation I had interrupted about influencers and brand synergy would now be replaced by a far more pressing one, a conversation about me, about my decline, about my condition. The cameras saw a confused old woman. Chloe saw a burden. Leo saw a problem he didn't want to solve. My frail facade was complete. My invisibility cloak was woven from their pity and their disdain. And under that cloak, Nightingale was preparing to fly. The house had its own rhythm, a pulse of activity during the day, and a deep humming silence at night. The days were my stage, where I performed my slow, meandering decline. But the nights were my office. The nights belonged to me. My basement room, once a symbol of my demotion, became my command center. It had one critical design flaw from Chloe's perspective: the small, adjoining bathroom. It was a tiny, windowless space, but the thick door and the lack of any vents or openings meant that the camera positioned outside my bedroom door was completely blind to whatever happened inside. It was my sanctuary, my war room. I would wait. I'd listen for the clicks and hums of the house settling, the final flush of a toilet upstairs, the soft thud of Chloe's sustainably sourced wool slippers on the hardwood floor above, the click of their bedroom door. I would give it another hour, letting the house fall into the deepest part of its slumber. Only then would I move. I wouldn't turn on a light. My eyes, long accustomed to the gloom, could navigate the short distance from my thin mattress to the bathroom door. Inside, I would sit on the closed toilet lid, the cold porcelain a stark contrast to the heat of my mission. From beneath a loose floor tile under the sink, a relic of the original construction that Richard and I had always meant to fix, I would retrieve the burner phone. It was an old, simple device. No GPS, no fancy apps, just calls, texts, and a battery that lasted for weeks. It was a ghost. My ghost. The first call to David after the cameras went up was charged with a new urgency. I pressed the speed dial, and he answered on the second ring, his voice low and alert. "Freya?" "It's me, David," I whispered, my voice barely a rustle of sound. "The performance has begun. I believe our audience is convinced." "Her suspicion has cooled?" "It has curdled into pity," I confirmed. "Which is far more useful. She sees a liability, not a threat. Now, it's time to guide your audit. Are you ready?" "I have the preliminary files from their accounting firm open right now." "Where do I start, Freya?" I closed my eyes, picturing the reams of data, the spreadsheets, the carefully constructed fictions they had built. This was my world. Richard and I had designed systems 100 times more complex than this. Their little empire of lies was a child's sandcastle. "Pull up the expense reports for the third quarter of last year," I began, my voice precise, stripped of all feigned fragility. The woman on the toilet in the dark was not the woman who spilled water at the dinner table. "Look for a line item under Market Research Development. You'll see a charge for approximately $45,000. The vendor will be listed as Bali Artisan Co-op." I could hear the soft clicking of his keyboard. I see it. Bali Market Research Trip, dated October 12th through the 22nd. Receipts for artisan textiles, sourcing meetings, local guide fees. A cold, mirthless smile touched my lips. "Now, David, open a new window. Go to Instagram." Chloe's personal account, the one she keeps private for friends and family. I know for a fact her cousin is one of your paralegals. I need you to have that paralegal login and look at Chloe's posts from those exact dates. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle on the other end of the line. "Freya, you are a marvel. Stand by." The minutes stretched out. I listened to the hum of the house's HVAC system, the ghost in their machine. My ghost, my system, my rules. "I'm in," David said, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. October 15th. A photo of Chloe and Leo in infinity pool. Caption: "Paradise found. So blessed to be able to unplug and recharge with my number one." The location tag is Serenity Sands Spa, Bali. There are a dozen more photos: massages, cocktails, sunset yoga. The only artisan textiles I see are the ridiculously expensive robes they're wearing. "Check the spa's website," I instructed. "Find their pricing for the ultimate couples rejuvenation package. I suspect it will be remarkably close to $45,000 once you factor in the private villa." More clicking. "You're right," he said, his voice tight with anger on my behalf. "The receipts they submitted are forgeries, crude ones, but they passed the initial glance of their overworked accountant. This is clear-cut fraud, Freya." "It's the first brick," I said calmly. "We're going to pull it out, and then we are going to dismantle the entire wall. Are you ready for the next one? Lead the way. Fourth quarter. Look for consulting fees paid to a vendor named C Strategic Solutions. It should be a monthly recurring payment of $10,000. Got it. Strategic Brand Consulting. C Strategic Solutions is a shell company registered as an LLC in Delaware. The registered agent will be a generic corporate service. But if you dig into the incorporation documents, the sole signatory, the owner of the company, is one Chloe Miller." "Miller?" David asked. "As in?" "Her maiden name," I finished for him. "She is paying herself a 60-figure salary, tax-free, from company funds for consulting work that was never performed. It's embezzlement, plain and simple." "My God," David whispered. "They're not just greedy, they're sloppy." "Arrogance breeds sloppiness," I replied, the words of my late husband echoing in my mind. "They believe they are untouchable. They believe the money is theirs. They have forgotten it flows from a source, and the source has a memory." Night after night, this became our ritual. I would slip into the darkness of the bathroom, my phone a cold talisman in my hand, and I would whisper their sins across the city to David. I became the ghost in their machine, a spectral auditor haunting their books. "David, check the company Amex statement for June 7th, I'd whisper a week later. "There's a charge for nearly $8,000 at Le Ciel, the French restaurant downtown. The expense report lists it as a dinner with potential investors from New York." I see it. Cross-reference that date with Chloe's mother's public Facebook page. You'll find a gushing post about the wonderful anniversary dinner her daughter and son-in-law treated her and her husband to. The photo she posted shows the four of them at a table at Le Ciel, time-stamped June 7th. The potential investors were her parents. Unbelievable. "Oh, it gets better," I continued, feeling a surge of icy power. "Pull Leo's company car mileage logs for the first week of March. He claimed a round trip to a tech conference in San Francisco, over 700 miles. Okay, I have the log. Now file a subpoena for his mobile phone's location data for that week. He never went to San Francisco. His phone will ping for 3 straight days at a cell tower covering the Pebble Beach Golf Resort. He wasn't networking with tech VCs. He was working on his handicap, and Project Nightingale paid for the gas, the hotel, and probably every overpriced drink at the clubhouse bar. Each piece of information was a nail I was handing David. And with each nail, he was building their coffin. I directed him to inflated invoices from a web design firm that was owned by Chloe's brother. I pointed out the office furniture purchase that perfectly matched the new patio set by their pool. I had him flag the charitable donation to a youth arts foundation that didn't exist, the funds for which were withdrawn as cash from an ATM near a casino in Las Vegas during a business trip Leo took alone. I was living a dual life. By day, I was Freya, the pitiable, forgetful woman who couldn't remember if she'd eaten lunch. I would ask Chloe what day it was, twice. I would stand in the middle of the kitchen, looking lost, until she would ask me what I needed in a tone one uses with a difficult child. I was a ghost of a different sort during the day, a transparent, ignored presence they moved around. But at night, in the dark, I was Nightingale. I was the architect of their downfall. I was the memory of the machine they thought they controlled. With every whispered phone call, I was reclaiming my life, my legacy, my name. I was no longer a victim in their story. I was the author of their final chapter, the weight of their cruelty, their lies, their disrespect. It was no longer a burden crushing me. It was fuel, and I was using it to light a fire that would burn their gilded cage to the ground. The day had arrived, not with a thunderclap, but with the sterile, artificial glow of a computer screen in a downtown high-rise. I sat beside David Chen, just out of the frame of his webcam, a ghost in the machine they were about to confront. On the large monitor before us, Leo and Chloe were perfectly framed in their minimalist home office. The white walls, the single pretentious succulent on the desk, the carefully curated backdrop of success, it was all a set piece I had paid for. They looked confident, polished. Chloe wore a cream-colored silk blouse, her hair pulled back in a severe, professional knot. She was the star. Leo, in a crisp blue shirt, was her handsome, supportive prop. He smiled, but his eyes kept darting around, a nervous energy thrumming just beneath his practiced calm. I knew that look. It was the same look he'd had as a boy when he'd broken a vase and was waiting for me to discover it. I watched them, my own reflection a faint superimposition on their image. I wasn't the woman in the faded cardigan they had left in the basement this morning. David's assistant had worked a quiet magic. My hair was styled in an elegant chignon, revealing the clean line of my jaw. I wore a tailored suit of navy blue, the kind of armor I hadn't donned in years. The fabric felt unfamiliar but grounding. My hands, which they were so used to seeing tremble slightly as I held a cheap plastic fork, were steady in my lap. I was a statue of placid fury. Chloe cleared her throat, her corporate voice filling the silent room. "Good morning, David. We're thrilled to finally connect with the representative for Project Nightingale. As you'll see in our Q3 projection deck, Aura Living is not just meeting but exceeding all growth targets." She launched into her presentation. The screen flickered with charts and graphs, a blizzard of buzzwords, synergistic alignment, leveraging core competencies, disrupting the wellness space. She spoke of authenticity, of building a brand that was real and holistic. I listened to her sell a fantasy built on a lie in a house that wasn't hers, funded by a woman she had deemed too unsightly to be seen. With every slide that glorified their hard work, the memory of the paper plate, of the cold basement, of my forgotten birthday, sharpened in my mind not as a wound, but as a whetstone. It was honing the edge of my resolve. Leo chimed in periodically, adding a supportive anecdote or a technical clarification, his voice filled with a hollow pride. He spoke of their vision, a word that tasted like ash in my mouth. Did his vision include a mother eating leftovers in a windowless room? He smiled at the webcam, a bright, empty, salesman smile. He was performing for a single, anonymous investor, unaware that the audience he had truly betrayed was watching his every move. He was so proud of the cage, he'd forgotten who had forged the bars. They finally reached their grand finale, the expansion plan, a global rollout, new product lines, a flagship store in Soho. It was ambitious, arrogant, and utterly detached from reality. Chloe's eyes gleamed with avarice as she spoke of market caps and IPOs. And so, she concluded, her smile wide and predatory, with an additional capital injection, we project a 500% increase in valuation within 24 months. We're offering Project Nightingale a chance to get in on the ground floor of the next great American lifestyle brand. She leaned back, folding her hands on the desk, the picture of satisfaction. Leo beamed beside her, nodding emphatically. The silence stretched. It was no longer the comfortable silence of a concluded presentation. It grew heavy, awkward. I saw Leo's smile twitch. Chloe's expression tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing her features. They were expecting praise, adulation. They were expecting an easy yes from their silent, faceless benefactor. I gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to David. He leaned forward, his face impassive, his hands steepled. When he spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of any emotion, which made the words land with the force of a physical blow. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. Another beat of silence. We are rejecting the proposal. The change in the room, 60 miles away, was instantaneous and profound. It was as if the air had been sucked out of their carefully constructed reality. Leo's face went slack, the pride draining away to be replaced by a baffled confusion. Chloe's smile didn't fall. It was wiped clean, a mask of disbelief hardening her features. I don't understand, Leo stammered, looking from Chloe to the screen. Did you see the numbers? The growth is exponential. David didn't even glance at the papers on his desk. The numbers are part of the problem, he said, his tone still chillingly neutral. He let the statement hang in the air for a moment before delivering the rest of the verdict. The proposal is being rejected due to gross financial mismanagement. He paused. I watched Chloe's knuckles turn white as she gripped the edge of her desk. And a violation of the investor's ethical charter. Chloe exploded. The carefully crafted facade of the serene lifestyle guru shattered into a million pieces, revealing the grasping, furious woman beneath. A violation? What are you talking about? Who do you think you are? Her voice, usually so measured and smooth for her followers, was shrill, ugly. We built this company from nothing. Our personal brand is unimpeachable. Who is this client? Who is this mysterious investor hiding behind their lawyer? We will sue you. We will sue you and this Project Nightingale into oblivion for this slander. Leo panicked, tried to intervene. Chloe, please, let's just be calm. David, there must be a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Leo, Chloe spat, turning on him. This is an attack. They're trying to steal our company. I watched her, my own heartbeat a slow, steady drum against my ribs. I let her rant. I let her spew threats and accusations. Every word was just another shovelful of dirt on the grave she had dug for herself. Her fury was a confession. David remained utterly calm, a rock against which her rage crashed and broke. He waited until she paused for breath, her chest heaving. The personal brand you speak of is indeed a factor in this decision, he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing them in. My client, the ultimate beneficial owner of Project Nightingale, has been observing for some time. and she has invoked Clause 12.4 of the Foundational Agreement. He said the words Clause 12.4 as if they were mundane, but I saw a flash of genuine fear in Leo's eyes. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew the language of finality when he heard it. Chloe just sneered. Clause what? I don't care about your ridiculous clauses. You should, David said simply. It is titled, The Right of Reclamation. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing. And she has decided to join this call, personally. David's finger moved to the keyboard. A small, familiar chime echoed from their speakers, the sound of a new participant entering the video conference. A black square popped up on their screen next to David's. For a half second, it was just a black void with the name F. Thorne written in white letters. I saw Chloe squint at it. F. Thorne? Who the hell is F. Thorne? Leo just stared, his face ashen. He knew. I think in that moment, some deep primal part of him knew. Then, the video feed connected. The black square resolved into a clear, high-definition image. It was me. I wasn't the hunched gray figure from the basement, clad in worn-out sweats. I was upright, poised, framed by the sweeping view of the Austin skyline from David's 40th floor office. The light from the window caught the subtle sheen of my silk blouse and the glint of my late husband's watch on my wrist. I said nothing. I simply looked at them, my expression serene, my eyes holding theirs. The ensuing silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a roar of dawning comprehension, of reality collapsing. Chloe's face, which had been red with rage, blanched to a stark, bloodless white. Her mouth opened slightly, a small, fish-like gasp. It was the face of someone seeing a ghost. Leo made a small, choked sound. He physically recoiled from the screen, his chair scraping against the floor. He didn't just see a ghost. He saw his judge, he saw his mother. I let them hang in that terrible, suspended moment, let the full weight of what they were seeing crush them. The woman they had dismissed, hidden, and starved of affection, was looking back at them from a throne of power they couldn't possibly comprehend. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, clear, and carried the cold, clean weight of absolute authority. Hello, Chloe. Leo? The shock on their faces was not exquisite. It was something more profound. It was the sight of a universe reordering itself before their very eyes. Leo looked like he couldn't breathe. Chloe's jaw worked, but no words came out. The furious CEO was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. I gave them no time to recover. I leaned slightly forward, my eyes never leaving theirs. You were looking for your clandestine patron? I asked, the question rhetorical, devastating. You can stop looking. You've been living in her house. I saw Leo flinch as if I'd struck him. I laid it all out for them, not with anger, but with the dispassionate precision of a coroner reading a report. Each fact was a nail in the coffin of their stolen life. The company, Aura Living, was built with a single seed investment. That investment came from a trust established by my late husband and me nearly 30 years ago. It's called Project Nightingale. Chloe shook her head, a tiny, spastic motion of denial. No, that's impossible. Is it? I continued, my voice unwavering. The house you are sitting in right now, I never sold it, Leo. The deed was transferred into the trust. It is, and has always been, my property. The cars you drive, I went on, the Tesla and the Range Rover are leased by the trust. The salaries you pay yourselves, drawn from company accounts, are funded entirely by the trust. Every vacation, every designer purchase, every expensive dinner you posted on Instagram to celebrate your hard-earned success was paid for with my money, my husband's money. I let that sink in. I watched the life drain from Leo's face, the slow-motion horror of a man realizing he is not a king, but a jester in a borrowed castle. Aura Living itself, I said, delivering the final, fatal blow. The brand, the concept, the name. It was an idea born from my work, from Richard's principles. You were never owners. You were stewards, caretakers of an idea. You were given everything you needed to succeed. capital, resources, a home, on one condition, stipulated in the ethical charter you so carelessly violated. The condition was that you act with integrity, with kindness, with decency. I paused, and in my mind's eye, I saw a paper plate on a marble countertop. I saw a door to a windowless room. I heard the word Leech whispered in the hallway. You own nothing, I stated, the words as final as a gavel's strike. You were a test of character, and you failed. Miserably. I looked from Chloe's shattered expression to my son, who was now openly weeping, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Your financial mismanagement was grounds enough for this. The forged signature on the credit application, David has the forensics on that, but that wasn't your greatest crime. I leaned in one last time, my voice dropping to an intense, quiet register that cut through his sobs. Your cruelty was the final breach of contract. The video feed was crystal clear. My face, composed and framed by the elegant, understated lines of David's office, looked back at them from their own oversized monitor. On their end, the camera was slightly askew, capturing the opulent, sterile living room that was once mine. Chloe's face was a mask of confusion, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitted together. Leo just stared, his mouth slightly agape, as if his brain was struggling to reconcile the woman on the screen with the frail, silent creature he'd locked in the basement. I let the silence hang in the digital air for a moment longer, a heavy, weighted blanket. David sat just out of my frame, a silent, supportive presence. I don't raise my voice, I began, my tone even, calm, and as solid as the mahogany desk in front of me. I didn't need to. The power in this conversation wasn't in volume, but in truth. I don't need to. You were looking for your silent benefactor, for the mysterious investor behind Project Nightingale. You've been living in her house, driving her cars, spending her money. You were given a single, simple directive woven into the very fabric of the trust, to act with decency, with integrity, and with compassion. It wasn't a business test, Leo. It was a character test. Chloe's confusion curdled into disbelief, then into a snarl. What are you talking about? This is insane. You're delusional. I ignored her, my eyes fixed on my son. I gave you everything you needed to build a life, a real one. The seed money, this house. It was all a gift, contingent on one unspoken clause, that you would care for your mother, not as an investor, not as a landlady, as your mother, but you saw me as a burden, a problem to be managed, a leech. The word hit Leo like a physical blow. I saw him flinch, his eyes finally showing a flicker of comprehension, of horror. All company assets are frozen, effective immediately, I stated, the words precise and surgical. All corporate accounts, credit cards, and lines of credit are now under my direct control. The Aura Living brand, which was merely licensed to you, is hereby dissolved. You have 48 hours to vacate my property. You may take your personal belongings only. Anything purchased with company funds, which is to say, nearly everything you own, will remain. Chloe erupted. It wasn't a shout. It was a raw animal sound of disbelief, a shriek from the depths of a soul being stripped of its gilded shell. No, you can't do this. We built this, from the ground up. You have no right. Her voice cracked, hysteria setting in. We'll sue you. We'll tell everyone you're a crazy old woman who's lost her mind. Sue me with what, Chloe? I asked, my voice still dangerously quiet. The lawyers you had on retainer were paid from a Nightingale account. That retainer has been terminated. The documents you forged, trying to gain access to the trust. David has copies. That's fraud. A felony. That stopped her. The scream died in her throat, replaced by a choked gasp. All the fight drained out of her, leaving behind a slack-jawed, hollowed-out woman. But I wasn't looking at her anymore. My focus was on Leo. He just sat there, completely and utterly broken. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at his hands, resting on the cold marble of the coffee table they'd bought. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, then another, and another. They streamed down his face, silent, heavy drops of regret, landing on the glossy surface of a magazine that featured his own triumphant face. He didn't make a sound. He just wept, his shoulders shaking with the silent, seismic force of understanding. He finally saw it all. The paper plate, the windowless room, the forgotten birthday, his own damning silence in the face of his wife's cruelty. He finally understood the magnitude of his betrayal. David leaned forward slightly, his voice a calm, professional baritone that cut through the charged silence. "The eviction notice will be delivered by courier within the hour. We trust you will comply." He reached out and ended the call. The screen went black, and I was left with my own reflection in the dark monitor. The woman staring back at me was not a vengeful victor. She was just free. The echo of Chloe's screams seemed to haunt the mansion for days, but eventually it faded, replaced by a profound, cleansing quiet. The silence in the house was a sound in itself, a stark contrast to the hollow laughter and brittle conversations that had once filled its rooms. I walked through the cavernous spaces, my footsteps soft on the hardwood floors. The walls were bare, marked by pale rectangles where their soulless, minimalist art had hung. The air no longer smelled of Chloe's expensive, cloying perfume, but of lemon polish and fresh paint as the prep team worked to erase their existence. All the assets of the dissolved Aura Living were being liquidated. Every dollar, every stock, every piece of property was being funneled into a new foundation I had created, the Nightingale Nest. It was a fund dedicated to providing legal aid and safe housing for elderly victims of familial abuse and neglect. Their cruelty would not be forgotten. It would be transformed. Their legacy of greed would fuel a legacy of grace. The Texas sun streamed through the large picture window, the one that looked out over the hills. I was on the phone, a simple cell phone, not the burner I had used in my basement prison. The voice on the other end was warm and bright. "Grandma, are you sure about the blue trim? I was thinking maybe a soft green for the logo. It feels more organic." I smiled. "Maya, my love, you're the designer. I'm just the financial backer. If you say green, we go with green." My granddaughter Maya, Leo's daughter from his first, failed marriage, laughed. She was the only one who had ever called, who had sent me small, thoughtful gifts, who had looked at me with kindness in her eyes when she visited. We weren't planning an empire. We were planning a small bakery and community garden, a place that would sell honest bread and fresh vegetables. Something real, something that nourished instead of postured. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen lit up with a name I once cherished. Leo. It was the 10th time he'd called that day. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the green answer icon. A flicker of the mother I used to be, the woman who would have dropped everything for the sound of her son's voice, stirred within me. But that woman was gone. He had let her starve in a room without windows. There were no words left to say. We had said everything with our actions, and most damningly, with our silences. I pressed the red decline button without a second thought and turned my attention back to Maya. "Now," I said, my voice clear and light. "Tell me more about this sourdough starter." They called me a leech. They called me a drain on their empire. They stood in my house, on my land, spending my money, and they never, for 1 second, understood. An empire isn't a brand name splashed across a magazine. It's not a balance sheet or a portfolio of assets. It is the life you build, brick by brick, with your own choices. It is the integrity you maintain when no one is watching. They built a gilded cage, not an empire. A beautiful, shimmering prison built on a foundation of lies, propped up by cruelty and neglect. They trapped themselves inside it long before I ever turned the key. I didn't take their future. I simply reclaimed the one they tried to steal from me. I reclaimed my home, my name, my peace. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty lawn. I stood on the patio, the stones still warm from the day's heat, and closed my eyes. I felt the gentle evening breeze on my skin and the last rays of the Texas sun on my face. It was a quiet, simple warmth. It cost nothing, and it was worth everything. This is my empire now, the freedom to exist.